1981, the capital of France, Paris, was suddenly shaken by a shocking crime involving a young Japanese man who had eaten a woman to satisfy his distorted desires. Many details of the case are based on real events, with very little or no changes, and the criminal himself recounted the entire story. The documentary, The Cannibal That Walked Free, horrified many viewers with the criminal's perverted and sick tendencies. Before continuing, we advise you to consider the disturbing nature of today's video content, as we once again face the terrifying actions of a cannibal who shocked the world that year. Sagawa Issei Sagawa was born in 1949 in Hyōgo Prefecture, Kobe, Japan, into a wealthy and powerful family. Spoiled by his parents, he lived a comfortable life and was even sent to study early at prestigious schools. However, no superior upbringing could prevent the deep-seated twisted desires within him. By the time Sagawa was in first grade, he had developed strange preferences, constantly staring at his classmates' thighs and thinking they looked delicious. Throughout his life, Sagawa was always small in stature, only 1.45 meters, about 4 feet 9 tall as an adult. He described himself as weak, ugly, and insignificant, and this insecurity fueled his desire to absorb the energy of strong, beautiful women. Surprisingly, Sagawa had no interest in Japanese women. He focused only on tall, blonde European women, whom he believed were the ideal embodiment of female beauty, those who could compensate for his small stature. Initially, Issei Sagawa's desires seemed like bizarre thoughts, but not too concerning. He started with a longing to be close, even intimate, with beautiful European women, whom he had long idealized. To outsiders, it might seem like mere fantasies. However, deep inside, Sagawa soon realized that his desires went beyond just closeness and far beyond normal sexual gratification. The most horrifying thing was that he did not just want to be with these women, he wanted to eat them. This desire began to form and grow, haunting him every day. Gradually, Sagawa became withdrawn, isolating himself from the world around him. He avoided contact with people, trying to hide in the silence of solitude. On the outside, Sagawa seemed like a quiet, unassuming man who posed no threat. But in his mind, he was consumed by horrifying thoughts, killing and eating the women he loved. These dark fantasies not only crossed Sagawa's mind as fleeting thoughts, but became a lifelong obsession. On 2 separate occasions, he tried to turn these sick thoughts into reality. The first attempt occurred in 1970, when Sagawa was a young student in Tokyo. While walking down the street, he spotted a woman he considered ideal. She perfectly matched the image he had fantasized about for so long. This woman was a German lecturer working at the university where Sagawa was studying. After deciding that she was the perfect target, he began to follow her quietly and secretly. One night, filled with eagerness and excitement, Sagawa decided to turn his sick fantasy into reality. He sneaked into the woman's apartment, believing he was just one step away from making his dreams come true. However, when Sagawa was about to attack, the woman suddenly woke up. In a panic, she screamed, causing Sagawa to flee in fear without carrying out his gruesome plan. After that failure, Issei Sagawa began to feel that he needed help. He decided to see a psychologist to confess the twisted thoughts that tormented his mind. However, after hearing the terrifying things Sagawa revealed, the doctor was not only horrified, but also quickly realized that Sagawa was an extremely dangerous threat to society. The psychologist classified Sagawa as a dangerous psychopath, someone capable of committing horrific crimes if not tightly controlled. Nevertheless, Sagawa's father, a wealthy and influential man, could not accept this painful truth. Instead of facing his son's problem, he decided to cover it all up and build a new life for Sagawa. He sought to get Sagawa out of Japan, arranging for him to study abroad in the hope that a change of environment would help his son escape from his sick thoughts. So, after completing his studies in Japan, Issei Sagawa set off to study abroad, carrying with him the ghosts of his past and the horrific desires that never went away. In 1981, Issei Sagawa left Japan and moved to Paris, France, to continue his studies at a prestigious university. However, behind this academic pursuit, he harbored dark and sick intentions, nurtured for a long time. In his mind, Paris was not only a magnificent city, but also a place where he could realize the mad aspirations he had suppressed for so long. Almost every night in Paris, Sagawa tried to invite prostitutes to his room. Each time, he always intended to kill them from behind, quietly executing the violent plan he had fantasized about for so long. However, each time, he restrained himself, not carrying out any action. The reason was not just fear or hesitation, but because he realized that these random victims did not satisfy his bizarre need. He did not just want to kill any woman. What he craved more was to eat a woman he loved. After many sleepless nights with terrifying thoughts in his head, Sagawa convinced himself that once he was fully prepared, he would be able to carry out his crazy dream. He believed that he just needed to wait for the right time, the right person, and that opportunity would come. And then, in 1981, he met someone he believed to be the perfect target to turn his horrifying fantasies into reality. Beautiful Dutch girl named Rini Harvel. Rini, with her beauty and grace, immediately became the object of Sagawa's long-held fantasies. Rini Harvel, then 25 years old, was a Dutch doctoral student, studying at the same university as Sagawa. She had an attractive appearance, intelligence, and was full of life. From the first meeting, Sagawa was captivated by Rini's appearance and quickly planned to get closer to her. He used the excuse of wanting to learn Germina language. Rini was fluent in Azerese to start talking and getting to know her. With his family's wealth, Sagawa did not hesitate to spend money to make a good impression on Rini. He frequently invited her to concerts, art exhibitions, and dinners at luxurious restaurants. With his extensive knowledge of culture and art, Sagawa made Rini feel comfortable around him. She liked him as an intelligent and knowledgeable friend who could share with her many interesting insights. However, Rini's feelings stopped at friendship. She had no romantic feelings for Sagawa and had no idea about the dark intentions brewing in his mind. Rini's unintentional rejection only fueled Sagawa's desire to possess her even more fiercely. He didn't just want her in the usual way. He wanted to own her forever in the most brutal way imaginable. On June 11, 1981, Sagawa decided to carry out the cruel plan he had been nurturing for so long. Using the pretext of wanting to discuss literature, a shared interest, Sagawa invited Rini to his apartment. As usual, Rini happily agreed. She had no idea that this invitation was the beginning of a terrible tragedy. When Rini arrived, nothing seemed unusual. They had dinner together, as they had before, and then Rini sat down to read poetry, an activity that often relaxed her. While Rini was engrossed in the verses, completely unaware, Sagawa began the first step of his plan. Quietly and slowly, he approached her from behind, holding a prepared gun. Step by step, he aimed at the back of Reni's neck and, In that moment, without hesitation, he pulled the trigger. The shot quickly took Rennie's life, ending the young woman's life, who had no idea what had just happened. In the moment after pulling the trigger, Sagawa felt a surge of fear and regret. He realized that his actions were too horrifying, too terrible, and for a brief moment, he considered calling for help. This regret seemed to be a natural human reaction to death and crime. But in just a moment, this thought was overwhelmed by a dark wave from within. I thought about calling for help, he confessed later, but then I asked myself, why would I be so stupid? This is the time to fulfill my long-held dream. Why not try it once? Despite Rini being on her period, detail that would normally disgust anyone, Sagawa did not hesitate to commit vile acts with her corpse. He no longer cared about anything except satisfying his bloodlust and fully possessing the victim's body and soul. Over the next 2 days, Sagawa committed a series of unimaginable barbaric acts. He not only abused the corpse, but also dismembered Rennie's body and began eating her flesh. His small kitchen became a gruesome crime scene where parts of Rennie's body were turned into grotesque dishes. Sagawa didn't stop until he had consumed nearly all of the victim's body. Viewing this act as the fulfillment of his long-held dream, he also meticulously planned and even stored parts of the body in the freezer, as if he were saving them for a long-term meal. Every time he took out a piece to use, Sagawa carefully took photos as a way of preserving the memory, a deeply disturbing act. In a shocking and extremely disturbing segment of the documentary about him, Sagawa detailed his plan to gradually eat each part of Rini's body. He even described in detail how he would carry out this act. Starting with her buttocks, the body part he found most attractive and interesting to eat first. Sagawa's madness was not only shown through his actions, but also through his cold and indifferent recounting of them, as if it were a natural and obvious thing. In an interview, Sagawa casually justified his actions. "No one believes me, but my goal was just to taste her flesh, not to kill. Who wouldn't want to try the taste of a beautiful woman?" This statement shows Sagawa's twisted thinking. For him, killing was just a necessary part of satisfying his desire. And eating a woman's flesh was not only a physical gratification, but also a way for him to possess her entirely. After 2 days of indulging in his animalistic desires and satisfying his insane cravings, on the 3rd day, Sagawa began to realize that he needed to cover his tracks. The body had been partially consumed, but many parts remained. He decided to clean up the scene and dispose of the remaining parts of the body. To do this, Sagawa packed the remaining parts of Rennie's body into a large suitcase, intending to take it to the Bois de Boulogne Park, a famous park in Paris, where he planned to dispose of it by dumping it into the lake. However, when Sagawa dragged the suitcase to the park, he began to fear that his actions might be discovered. His anxiety grew when he realized that the suitcase could draw attention. Panicking, he decided to abandon the suitcase in the park without executing his plan to dump it into the lake. He hurriedly left the scene, hoping that no one would notice it. The next morning, as dawn broke, a couple enjoying a peaceful walk in Bois de Boulogne Park stumbled upon a horrific scene. The large suitcase Sagawa had abandoned earlier began revealing its contents. A woman's hand was protruding from the edge of the suitcase, and bloodstains were seeping through its surface. Horrified and terrified by the sight, the couple immediately reported it to the police. The police quickly arrived at the scene. Upon opening the suitcase, they were confronted with a scene more horrifying than they could imagine. The dismembered parts of a young woman's body stuffed inside, The police immediately launched an investigation, and within 2 days, they followed clues leading to the address of Issei Sagawa, Japanese man living in Paris, and the perpetrator of this brutal crime. Witness statements and details from security cameras in the park led them to Issei. Sagawa's addressed the same man who had carried out the heinous murder. When the police stormed Sagawa's apartment, they found undeniable evidence. In his refrigerator, multiple parts of Rennie Harvel's body were still stored, prepared for more grotesque acts he planned to carry out. The victim's body parts from arms and legs to other internal organs were frozen, meticulously divided as if Sagawa was stockpiling for a series of perverse meals. This sight not only disgusted the police, but also highlighted the depth of the killer's obsession. Although the police arrested Sagawa and collected all the evidence from the scene, including his confession to the crime, the legal proceedings for him were not over. Surprisingly, despite the horrific nature of Sagawa's crime, the legal systems in France and Japan created an incredibly unbelievable situation. Sagawa, a psychopathic killer who had cannibalized his victim after being apprehended and brought to trial, did not face the punishment many believed he deserved. After Issei Sagawa was imprisoned in France, his trial began with a psychiatric evaluation. The results showed that he had severe mental disorders. But the truth behind this was the intervention of his father, a wealthy and influential man in Japan. His father hired a top lawyer to defend his son, significantly influencing the trial process. After 2 years of court proceedings, French judge Jean-Louis ruled that Sagawa suffered from a mental illness and could not be held criminally responsible for his actions. Instead of facing prison, he was ordered to undergo indefinite treatment at the Paul Giraud Hospital, a facility for the mentally ill. This decision caused public outrage when, after only 15 months of confinement and psychological evaluation at the hospital, Sagawa was declared insane and escaped punishment under the guise of mental illness. Despite the horrifying nature of the crime that shocked France, he did not face any criminal penalties due to powerful intervention. After 2 years of detention and interrogation in France, instead of remaining in a psychiatric hospital, Sagawa was deported back to Japan in 1984. Many believed that upon his return, Sagawa would be required to spend the rest of his life in a mental hospital, where he could no longer pose a danger to society. However, the situation unfolded differently. When he returned, he was sent to Motsuzawa Psychiatric Hospital for further psychological evaluation. The doctors there did not conclude that Sagawa suffered from uncontrollable mental illness, as the French court had ruled. Instead, they determined that he was fully capable of being responsible for his actions. His motive for murder was concluded to be due to deviant and perverse sexual desires, not severe mental illness. However, at the time, a significant legal issue arose. Sagawa's case had been closed in France, and no records or evidence were transferred from France to Japan. As a result, Japanese authorities lacked the legal basis to prosecute him again for the heinous crime he had committed. Because of this, in 1985, Sagawa was completely free despite the horrific crime he had committed in France. His freedom sparked outrage not only in Japan but around the world. A depraved killer, unrepentant, was released without any punishment, becoming a symbol of the lack of justice in this case. His family brought him back to Tokyo. Surprisingly, after his release, Sagawa faced no difficulty in reintegrating into society. He even became a celebrity. Sagawa actively appeared in interviews, unabashedly sharing his gruesome story. He even seemed healthier and more robust than before. From the late 1980s to the early 1990s, Sagawa's name appeared frequently in Japanese media. He wrote several books, including a memoir that detailed the gruesome process of murder and cannibalism. Astonishingly, the book sold 200,000 copies. Sagawa didn't stop there. He made videos to satisfy the curiosity of those who wanted to learn about a cannibal. He created a website, posted chilling excerpts from his memoirs, and held discussions on why cannibalism was not horrifying. He even drew a comic titled Sagawa, detailing how he consumed Rini's flesh. Sagawa described the taste and how he prepared each body part for consumption before his arrest. Although grotesque and enraging, his work was published. Fortunately, the number of prints was minimal, and it can now only be bought online for hundreds of dollars on major e-commerce sites. Sagawa lived his life without any remorse. In his later years, he openly expressed his bizarre and terrifying pride. He declared, "They call me the saint of cannibalism," as if it were a title of honor rather than one of horror. He seemed incapable of understanding the terror and outrage his actions caused, displaying instead a disturbing sense of self-satisfaction. Sagawa not only lacked remorse, but also publicly expressed his desire to continue his crimes. In an interview, he confessed that his urge to kill and eat people still haunted him daily. He recounted, "This morning, on my way to the train station, I saw a beautiful girl. I thought again about my desire to do it one more time before I die." In 2013, Sagawa suffered a stroke, leaving him disabled and dependent on his brother. His life became more reclusive, and he no longer appeared as often in public. Despite this, the shadow of his crimes continued to loom over public memory. He passed away in November 2022 at the age of 73. However, the shadow of his crimes continued to haunt public memory. People remembered him as a clear example of the corruption of human nature and the horrors that violent desires can bring. His death marked the end of a horrifying chapter in criminal history. But the haunting memory of his heinous acts remained in the minds of those who knew of his case.